Quick question before we start. Have you ever known exactly what you wanted to say until it was suddenly your turn to speak? Yeah, then you're in the right place. You're listening to the Spacious Brain Podcast, where real neurodivergent humans with real jobs and real daily chaos overshare with pride. Minus the glossy, my ADHD is my superpower nonsense. Hi, I'm Noemi, a scientist, a neurodiversity coach. Yes, someone who will absolutely derail into a story from when I was 12 because I'm ADHD and tangents are my love language. If you ever felt alone or felt like the Temu version of neurodivergent because you're not an entrepreneur, not a CEO, and you forget to eat and drink on the same day, you're in the right place. Let's keep this real. In this episode, I'm speaking to Meri, a South African living in the UK and a CTO in Scale Ups. Meri was diagnosed with ADHD and autism in adulthood. And we talk about what happens when a high achiever brain hits a wall and what changes when you finally get the right explanation. We cover leadership, justice sensitivity, psychological safety, why questions aren't insubordination, and how to build workplaces where neurodivergent people don't have to run everything on hard mode. Welcome, Meri. Thank you so much for being here today.
Super happy to be here.
The first question, which is a question that I ask everybody, is who is Meri?
So I'm a South African living in the UK. I'm a wife. My wife and I have been together almost 20 years, well, married almost 20 years, together for longer. And by day, I'm a CTO. So I'm a Chief Technology Officer, usually at scale-ups. So quite large teams, few hundred people, quite technical, but also very people focused. So good mix of tech and people. And then outside of work, I chair a big tech leadership conference called Lead Dev. I'm an advisor to a early stage VC here in London. I run a small charity called One Goes Up. I'm on the board of a company called Flagstone. We probably should have realized from my career that I had ADHD rather than anything else, but we didn't. And then from a personal life point of view, I love video games, I love Lego, I love underwater photography. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this. The idea for me for this podcast was to have not, CEOs, entrepreneur, but the moment that I met you, you struck to me as one very honest person that never shied away from the struggles of being neurodivergent, but also, disability in general. And this is it. It's not that toxic positivity story. It's, yes, I can do a lot of stuff, but that's not without its weight. So thank you for being here today. Um, when did you get your diagnosis?
About 5 years ago, maybe six, and the autism diagnosis was expected. I'd worked with enough people with autism that I was pretty able to recognize some of those traits in myself. There were a set of people who I realized we had our best one-to-ones on sofas because then we were side by side rather than face to face. And we didn't either of us have to worry about eye contact. And I said this to one of them and they went, "Oh, is this why my wife and I only have good conversations in the car?" And I was like, "Yep, that's why." um, and then the ADHD diagnosis was straight out of left field. I had no idea at all because of the autism, don't always exhibit some of the very classic ADHD symptoms. I'm not late for things, I don't lose things, but that's because I have all of these systems to make my autism side of my brain happy. And so my keys are always in the same pocket. And so I've never lost my keys, but that's because they're always in the same pocket, right? And so it's not that it's not that I don't have that aspect of ADHD. It's just that the coping mechanisms I have for the autism have sort of offset them a little bit. Yeah.
What brought you to seek a diagnosis?
Pretty major career crisis. So I was working at Monzo. I was unproductive for the first time in my career. And turned out it was because I wasn't sleeping great and I had given up coffee for 6 months. And turns out I had been self-medicating with caffeine in a really big way most of my career, most of my life probably. And yeah, I was like a 7 double espressos a day kind of person before I gave up coffee. And so giving up coffee took a long time because I had to sort of wean off it because of the withdrawal symptoms. And then, yeah, when I was fully off it, I couldn't get through my to-do list. And that was something that had never happened to me. I'd never been unproductive. If anything, I was always doing extra things on top of my day job, right? So it was very weird. It was very uncomfortable. And it was noticed at work, and that was a problem. So I ended up in difficulty at work because of it. And then that, my work was so much a huge part of my identity that then it made me very unhappy. And so I went and found a really good clinical psychiatrist, sorry. And he pretty much immediately went, well, you've obviously got ADHD. And I went, what? And then the autism part came a little bit later.
And how did that make you feel? So when you finally got your diagnosis?
I mean, a lot of feelings. Angry at first that it had been this easy for other people all along. So I started taking Alvance, and I remember saying to my doctor, I didn't know my brain was noisy until it went quiet. My experience of life was like having 200 tabs open at all times and not being able to choose which one got my focus, and just making the best of whichever one had my focus at a given moment, and trusting that if I just worked on whatever was in front of me at the moment, then eventually it would like rotate to something important and I'd get that done too. And so I remember being very angry, very like, oh my God, this is how easy it is for everybody else. That's terrible. And then I think the main other feeling was relief and just a sense of, okay, I'm not broken, I'm different. And I can work with this. I can figure out how to be better, not despite this, but because of this. And that was healing in a way. It was good.
With all the people that I've talked to, there is this common trend about when you get your diagnosis late, you kind of like make peace with yourself. It's like for your entire life, you haven't known this big part of you, and you still got through it. You still, you have your degree, you have your career, you arrive where you wanted to be, but all of a sudden you're like, I know myself in a completely different way, and that is so powerful. And it's amazing to see how it's recurrent for all of us and all the ones that I've spoken to. But how were you as a child?
So looking back, I have the impulsivity style of ADHD rather than the inattentive or the hyperactive. And so looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, I did have to be taught that just shouting out answers in class wasn't okay, or that, I had to put my hand up, or those kinds of things. Those were definitely a sort of late realization. I think I was quite unruly. I was very academically strong, but not necessarily because of hard work. So actually in primary school, I was so bored. My parents wanted me to skip a grade, and there's a lot of bias in South Africa against, at the time, against women, against English-speaking kids, and nowhere near as bad as the racial bias and everything else that existed. The principal of the school literally said English children aren't clever enough to skip grades. That's not happening. And so I
Ouch.
was stuck, absolutely bored out of my skull. I used to correct the teachers, which obviously didn't go down well, but I didn't have the emotional awareness to understand why they were so upset about it. I thought they were just upset about being wrong. and yeah, not that some kid was correcting them, and I was right. It wasn't just that I was correcting them, it was that I was correct. And then I went to this really amazing high school called Renish. It's the oldest girls' school in the country, but it's sort of resolutely not a private school. It's got some fees to make sure that there's enough teachers, but it's stayed a state school very deliberately to try and make sure that it's sort of an opportunity available to a broader range of people. And at Renish, it was much more English speaking by default, and so me being English speaking wasn't such a big problem. It was an all girls school, so that wasn't such a big problem. And then they really instilled in me this sense of, yeah, it's great that you got 99%, but if you'd studied even a tiny bit, you could have got 100. And so they were the first time that they were like, yeah, 90% is fine, but 100 would be better, wouldn't it? You should do some work, and really instilled a proper work ethic in me. And I think that made a big, big, big difference in my life and in my career.
And this is something else that I've noticed, that when you're ADHD or when you're neurodivergent in general, all you need to find is that person that understands how your brain works, understands that reward system, for example, for ADHD. And then all of a sudden, you're super productive. You're not just productive, you go above and beyond. Or when you're autistic and they understand that, you have that curiosity that you have to go deeper into topics, all of a sudden you flourish. So, looking at today and how the school system works, what do you think should change?
I mean, how the school system worked when I was a kid was kind of okay, and it was probably like a very old-fashioned type of school. It was, people would visit school, other schools would visit from the UK and from the US and places like that. And they were like, oh, this is very like us 50 years ago. But I didn't find it bad. Like it was very orderly and very structured, and that probably helped a lot. And you always knew what to expect. It was a boarding school. I lived at school, and that taught me a lot. It was at first a bit like landing on Mars, because I had only had boys for friends until that point, and so I was suddenly surrounded by all these girls, and I had no idea how girls worked. And so I think it was very positive for my personal development that I was sort of suddenly living with a load of folks in a like 10-person dorm room. So I was right in with a whole bunch of people. It taught me a load of social skills I don't think I would have developed otherwise. But yeah, I think I suppose I chose a set of subjects that were more about understanding principles and then applying them, like physics and maths and those kind of, well, and then languages, and computer science. And so I suppose like I figured out a way for myself that school wasn't just about memorization, and that helped a lot.
What are the things that you struggled the most with growing up?
Obeying people when there wasn't a good reason is probably the honest answer. I was pretty unruly, but very strong academically, right? And very involved in extracurricular stuff. So I did sports and I did arts and I did, creative writing and all these other things. And so I think I had a huge amount of energy, and there was a lot of ways to expend that energy in the particular setting that I was in. And it worked very well for me. Obviously, I think there were people with different flavors of autism, different flavors of ADHD that maybe had more of a struggle with it. But it's hard for me to look back and judge which things were possible because of my neurodivergence and which things were possible because of my intellect, right? I think I brute forced through a lot of things by just being smart enough in some places.
And I completely second that. The moment that you said to me, the thing that I struggled the most was the obeying people that I didn't understand. I pictured myself in high school. I remember clearly this thing that put me in trouble for so many years. Like I had this teacher, this history teacher. And in her mind, in order for you to prove that you had studied, you had to use the highlighter on the book. And I was like, no, I don't like it. Like it ruins the book. Like I really care about books. So for me to study, I have to rewrite everything on my notebook. And she was like, oh, but that you're going to get a bad grade because for me, you haven't studied. And I was like, just you wait. I'll prove you wrong.
Yeah, I also remember
Yeah.
being so unruly in my German class that I would get kicked out occasionally. And so I took Latin, which ran at the same time. So if I got kicked out of the German class, I would just go to the Latin class instead. Um, Ironically, the other girl who I was very unruly with, she's now a surgeon and I'm now a CTO. So like we've both done very well despite having paid very little attention during our German lessons. Clearly didn't hurt us that much.
Um, have you ever worked in a workplace where you felt safe and respected as a neurodivergent?
By other people, like by the team, yes. By leadership, no. I think is the reality. So I think that a lot of senior leaders are very uneducated on the topic. The best I had was one where my chief product officer and I were both neurodivergent, and so that was the most important relationship at work. And the fact that it was incredibly easy because we were both so similar was super valuable. She's definitely ADHD. I think she's ADHD as well, and so that worked very well. Our teams respected that we were a little different in terms of how we thought and how we communicated. Actually, at this organization, there was a employee resource group, like a employee group called Scatterbrains, which was all of the neurodivergent folks, and that little support community was really wonderful. But do I think the CEO understood the way our brains were different? No, and didn't have any interest in it either.
Yeah. And again, this is something that I find very often, that you have people that in the teams are willing to understand, are willing to do more. But when you reach a certain level, it's like, no, there is still that concept that you're only professional if you speak in a certain way. You're only professional if you show up in meetings and give your contribution in a very neurotypical way. So, the question that I have is, being who you are and having been in many companies, very also important companies and in leadership roles, what do you think are the things from the neurotypical leadership book that should be completely erased from history?
Telling people what to do without telling them why. And I think almost everything that is problematic is related to that. Almost everything that is problematic is authority without reason, not explaining the background to things, not explaining the reason why to do things a certain way. All of that stems from this kind of, well, I can just have authority and I don't have to explain myself. And it's because they view it as having to explain themselves that they don't want to do it. They're like, well, hang on, they should respect my authority and just do it. And I'm like, some of us don't obey unless we understand why, and that's not going to change just because you're more senior or in charge or any of those things. Like, we're going to just ask why a lot and be very frustrating for you if you can't explain. And bluntly, we're going to do better. Everybody's going to do better if they understand why they're doing the thing rather than just blindly obeying. And so I think it's actually interesting because management science says that that's terrible as well. Like, management science is not a fan of expect obedience. It says you get the most out of people if you explain why and you involve them in solving the problem and you involve them in understanding the metrics that matter and how to measure progress and all of those things, right? So I think actually the official, if you look at management science and what it says, it's not anti-neurodivergent, or it's not an approach that we can't adapt to. And it's actually a bunch of stuff that will probably make things better for neurotypicals and neurodivergents if adopted.
And you are a leader yourself. So what do you think are those neurodivergent traits that help you with your role?
I think needing to understand the why behind things is probably the most important one. I also found that in order to pay attention, I have to process things very, very fast. So I read very quickly. I was very lucky. I was part of a trial for some software that taught kids to read faster when I was in high school. So I read 1,200 words per minute without trying, like without any effort. And a good graduate reading speed is 300 words per minute. So I'm reading 4 times faster than the good graduate reading speed. That helps a lot because there's a lot of reading and writing involved in, or a lot of reading in particular involved in leadership roles. So I think that helps. And, on the one hand, that's a skill I've learned. But on the other hand, my brain needs to go quickly for it to stay focused. That's the reality of it. And so I think part of why I took to that training so well was because it was speeding me up. And so I was feeding my brain with more novelty by getting there. I think the fact that I'm motivated by novelty and learning rather than importance is also actually valuable in a leadership role, because I think it makes you more innovative. You're more likely to consider different solutions and different things as well.
And what about the social aspect, because there is this common misunderstanding about autistic people that, oh, they don't have emotion, they don't have empathy. So I want to break this myth right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think particularly for women, or folks who are assigned female at birth, it's usually the opposite. It's usually that we're over empathetic. We're so sympathetic and empathetic and trying to put ourselves in other people's shoes all the time that we lose who we are ourselves. I'm very analytical about emotions, and that's probably not great on a personal level because I'm not sure I feel them all the time. I think about them a lot. And then, but from a understanding other people point of view, being very rational and analytical about what they're thinking, why they're thinking that, why they're feeling that is actually quite helpful. But it's quite tiring because I'm basically running Monte Carlo simulations in my head all the time. Like, why is this the case? What are the possibilities? What's most likely? What's going on here? But actually, the thing that helped me the most from an interpersonal point of view was probably the high school I went to, like I talked about earlier, but also at university, I was a bouncer. That was my main part-time job. I was a bouncer and I worked security at a football club that had some pretty intense rivalries and some pretty big problems with fighting. So yeah, I think I learned a lot about understanding and judging emotion in a quite like danger fraught way. So you're trying to work out whether this guy is just angry about the result, or he's angry about the result and he's got a knife. Is this person, giving me drama because they don't think that women can be bouncers, or because he's really about to get very, very violent? And at the time I could bench press 200 kilos. So there were definitely, and it's always in Britain, it's always little guys who have a problem with women being bouncers. It's very funny. It's never the big rugby player dude. It's always some little shit, right? And I remember once somebody giving me a load of about it on the door, and I literally like picked him up by the front of his shirt and held him against the wall while he reevaluated his gender politics and kept checking people into the club, and eventually like let him down and let him leave. But yeah, I think that the thing that probably taught me the most about understanding people was that bouncer work for a few years while I was at university.
I can see that because, when you're in that position, you have to evaluate and assess the situation quite quickly. And you have to look at people, and with one look, you have to say, you're going to be a problem, or no, we're going to be fine. It's basically a running analysis in hyperspeed. And I think there is a lot of that in leadership, right? Because you have this complex human being in front of you, and you have to understand, is this just a rant? Is it true? Is there anything behind it that has to do with his personal life? And yeah, I can see how that has helped.
There's a little bit of a history with me of like doing things on hard mode, and I think working out how to understand people with like a hint of danger was definitely working out emotions on hard mode. I also had a bad stammer as a kid, and I joined the debate team because I figured that would fix it. So I'm not sure this is the solution for everybody, is the thing I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I've worked in a pub when I was young, and this is the other thing. Like when you have to deal with people that are drunk, and you have to assess the situation, and it's like, oh, yeah, you're really going to give me a problem, or I can just walk away safely. And being a woman, again, there is a whole lot of things that you have to consider. So yeah, I think I've learned how to read people pretty well, to the point that people now look at me and are like, how did you know? And I'm like, yeah, like I can see the micro expression in your face telling me that, like you're an open book to me. In your experience with all the teams that you worked, particularly scaling them up, what do you think is probably it's not one thing, but what are those things that make a team psychologically safe? And what breaks that safe instantly?
I mean, I think psychological safety is all about feeling able to speak up. And so that's feeling that you can ask why and there won't be repercussions, that you can point something out and it won't be problematic. And so one of the things that's quite funny to me is I think a lot of neurodivergent people look like they think they're psychologically safe, even when they maybe aren't. Because the way our behaviors play out, we will ask why, we will challenge things, we will ask more and more questions, we will try to understand. And some of the behaviors that from a neurodivergent person are simple seeking understanding are viewed by neurotypicals as challenge. And so, I think that quite often neurodivergent folks act as if they feel psychologically safe, even when they don't. And that's, us being true to our nature rather than us feeling necessarily like there's no repercussions. It's just that we can't not take that risk because we need to know the information, we need to understand in order to operate. And so I think that mostly it's about knowing that questions are welcome, that challenge is welcome, that the people in charge believe that the best ideas come from, full involvement from the group. And I think the thing that breaks it instantly is being told off for asking questions. So I think any time that you're told, it's not up for discussion, or, I'm in charge and you're going to do it whether you like it or not. Those kind of things, I think, break psychological safety instantly. That dependence on hierarchy and authority in order to push things through is, it's very old-fashioned and very anti-neurodivergent.
I guess this brings me naturally to the next question, which is, how is your justice sensitivity?
Incredibly strong. So, and I grew up in apartheid, right? So I grew up surrounded by a system that was inherently wrong and broken and evil in many ways, right? Like we had 15% of the population oppressing the other 85% of the population, because that's what a lot of people forget about South Africa, was it was a minority oppressing the majority. That was the situation that we had. And so to this day, the only things that make me cry are injustice. Like, I can't watch some movies about, things like apartheid or slavery or whatever, because I will just be so upset by it. And yeah, my sense of justice is incredibly well developed. And yeah, my desire for fairness is very, very strong.
How do you bring this together when you work in a company, and there are sometimes decisions that are just unjust, that you feel that, but you have to go through with them?
I tend not to go through with them. I tend to fight them really hard at the source. And I also do things like, I have a practice of any company I join, I immediately do a pay review. And every company I have joined, I have found that there are women who are significantly underpaid, sat next to people doing the same job who are being paid 40% more. Everywhere I've joined, there's been at least one person who's got at least a 30-40%, sometimes even more pay rise. And the most distressing one of those was somebody who went, I can't accept this pay rise because I can't do 40% more work. And I had to go, you don't need to do 40% more work. You're being underpaid for the work you're doing today. Like, you should be getting back pay for all the years that you've been doing the work you've been doing. I can't do that, but I can fix it from now on. And so I do pay review at the point of joining and fix any changes. And that's one of my requirements for taking a role, is that I'll be allowed to do that. And then I also put in place very strong calibration processes. So it's not easier to get promoted in one part of the organization than another. It's not a different standard if you work for this manager than that manager. And getting those two things right is very, very important to me, particularly for technology teams, because there is a lot of people getting, they get an outside offer, or they get they go and pitch themselves to their boss and they get a big pay rise. And so inequity is particularly severe in tech teams, I think, because we're such expensive individuals as well.
Yeah. And, you touched about the tech sector, and I know that it moves very quickly, particularly nowadays, with everything that is happening. Human people, and specifically neurodivergent humans, they usually don't move as fast as. So, how do you work scaling organization at speed without triggering the burnout, the reactivity, the chaos?
I think by making the change safe, right? So a lot of what it can feel like is, oh, we're overwhelmed by all these new people. If that's how you frame it, if you frame it as, hey, reinforcements are on the way, this is great, we're going to have help. Like, it's a very different experience when somebody goes, oh, I'm so glad this new person is in my team because they're going to help share the load. Where if somebody's of the opinion of like another person to onboard, then it's, I think framing can help a lot. I think getting people excited about their new colleagues and the new experience that's going to be brought into the team is really valuable. I think that, yes, people don't change as fast as the world is changing, but actually the neurodivergent folks who've got the love of novelty, particularly ADHD folks have a love of novelty, they tend to be doing even better than the others in keeping up, because they are just so much better at getting focused on something new and going deep on it. So I think that the depth of deep dive that somebody autistic wants to do and the hyper focus that somebody with ADHD wants to do, and we're only talking about a couple of types of neurodivergence, and obviously there's more, but I think it's quite common for all neurodivergents to be quite motivated by novelty, by what's new. And so I think we're actually better set up for that. And if anything, you have to, as a leader, be aware of the fact that, yes, your people who you might easily feel close to because you're also neurodivergent, they might be taking the change better than the neurotypical folks. And so you have to make sure as a leader that you're talking to everybody, not just to the folks who remind you of yourself.
And how do you protect yourself? So, what are your boundaries and what are your recovery mechanisms?
So the main thing for me is, for the last close to 10 years, I've worked a 4-day work week. So that's not actually because of my neurodivergence, it's because of my physical disability. So I've got something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's a collagen defect. So my body makes enough collagen, but everything it makes is sort of structurally inadequate. And so all my joints dislocate. I've got lots of problems with my internal organs because there's lots of collagen there. My skin's very, very soft and takes color very well. So my tattoos are pretty great, but my, there's some other problems because of it. And I increasingly found that I was going to work on days when I probably shouldn't, because my schedule was so packed that I looked at my day and just went, oh, those decisions can't wait 3 weeks for my schedule to be free again. And so I started taking Mondays off. And that acted as like a fire break in my calendar. So even if I was sick one point during the week, I could take that day and be like, my shoulder's dislocated, I just can't work today. But today's meetings can move to Monday. And most things can wait 2 or 3 days. Not everything can wait 2 or 3 weeks. And that was a real breakthrough for me. I think I'm a much better leader now that I still do the full job in 4 days. You can't really do 80% of a CTO job. It's not very possible, but do it in a way that works better for me. And it's a little like just having a no meeting day on a Monday, I suppose, with me not feeling guilty if I choose to spend the day building Lego to recharge or playing video games to recharge. And that tends to be what I do for sort of refilling my cup, is reading, board games with friends, video games on my own. And I play the kind of video games that are very like story driven, just me on my own. I'm not a Call of Duty or whatever the online ones are. I don't play any of those. I play all the single person adventure ones, and then complicated Lego, and then whenever I get the chance, underwater photography. So snorkeling or scuba diving and taking photos. Those are my things that refill me. And I like travel. I do a sort of a mix of, we go back to one place that's the same place, and we go back to, for our summer holiday, we kind of go same place every year, know what to expect, know that it's going to be good. And then the rest of the travel in the year tends to be places we haven't been before. So novelty, safety, familiarity.
Structure, but then some novelty, some dopamine that comes from the novelty. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly that.
In the workplace, what type of support structure do you think that the neurodivergent individuals need, particularly in tech?
So we, Scatterbrains, the group at Plio, actually wrote a whole document which was advice for neurotypical managers of neurodivergent folks. And I'll happily share it with you if you'd like to share it with the audience as well. But one of the big things that came out from that when we were all talking together was written instructions. Just having what needs to be done written down to refer to, rather than having to rely on our memories, having to rely on whether we interpreted it right, having to face the reality that sometimes people are inconsistent about what they said they wanted and what they actually wanted. And so I think writing it down is actually one of the big things that's super helpful.
Thank you for also offering to share it, because I think it would be very useful. Do you think you mask a lot?
Not so much anymore. I think I used to a lot, and I've just increasingly found that I don't have the energy, ironically, to do this senior job and to be masking at the same time is very challenging. So I am much more myself these days, and I tend to interview in a very myself way as well. So people they know what they're getting, and if they're okay with it, then cool. And if they're not, then it's better that we know before I start than that I join, and then it's a problem, right?
Yeah.
I think even as a youngster, I had that attitude about being queer. So like, I remember in my first few job applications in the UK, there would be a space for like anything else you need to say. And I was like, well, I'm gay, and if that's a problem, I'd rather you didn't interview me than whatever, right? And I remember at least one of the places I interviewed, they like specifically made sure I got to talk to one of the gay guys to prove that was that was okay. And it was, far too blunt. And, I'm South African and autistic, so you get like double directness from me. We have that sort of Dutch style directness is very much a part of our culture. But yeah, I suppose I think of it very similarly. Like, if someone's going to have a problem with me because I have a wife, then, or they're going to have a problem with me because I'm autistic or because I'm ADHD, then, this is probably not going to work out for either of us. So it's better to not, and I've been very lucky and very privileged to have, enough of a reputation and enough of a, good CV and that kind of stuff to be able to still get jobs despite having that sort of red line for myself that I'm not going to engage in workplaces that are going to hate who I am.
And do you feel now, with everything that you know and the journey that you had, that your life would have been any different with an early diagnosis?
Oh, I think it would have been very different with an early diagnosis. I think I would have had help much earlier. I'm on a couple of medications for both autism and ADHD that are massively, massively helpful. I went through a really tough period 15 years ago when I ended up with PTSD from something terrible that happened to me in a hospital. I think I would have maybe not been able to prevent it happening, but I certainly would have understood my reaction better if I had known at the time. I think I would have been much less annoying for people at my university and at my school if I had known and anybody around us had known what was going on. So I've had a couple of friends who've got their kids diagnosed early and been very worried about whether to put them on medication and whether it was going to, make them dependent on the medication forever. And I was just like, seriously, guys, if I had known earlier and I had had the meds earlier, I would have had such an easier life. It would have been, everything about having autism and ADHD is like playing life on hard mode. And why would you withhold from your kid something that lets them play it on normal mode? It's just crazy to me. And, and I think I also reassured some of them by saying, like, you got to remember that though in theory these substances are addictive, the biggest problem people with ADHD have is forgetting to take their meds. So it can't be that addictive if we can't even remember to frickin' take the stimulants. And really all it does to us is sort of chill us out and help us focus. I know stories of a couple of people who, they and their friends did some cocaine for the first time at a party or whatever, and everybody else is like, ooh, and all high and everything, and then there's the person who's reorganizing the Tupperware cupboard, and it's like, yeah, you might be having a different reaction to everybody else. So yeah.
Do you have any funny stories yourself that were derived, from any of your traits? Because whoever I spoke to, like, they have, oh yeah, I don't have any filter, and this has put me in trouble so many times, or all
I mean,
of those things.
the over directness is definitely a thing. So I got a lot of feedback early in my career that to me sounded like being South African and stop being a butch woman. This is not okay. And it took a really amazing director, a woman called Michelle Hughes, to translate that feedback for me into, hey, people think you're trying to make them feel stupid when you come with a direct answer and a direct solution. And then I was like, oh, shit, that's not my intention. I'm not trying to make anybody feel stupid. That I can work on. But not being who I am is very difficult to work on, right? Like, pretend to be somebody you're not. I'm already struggling to, like, pretend to be human enough, like, let alone pretending even more than that. And so, yeah, I definitely got in trouble for being too direct or asking too many questions and all of those kind of things early on. But I think was just lucky that I was academically and then in work strong enough at getting shit done that it was sort of an acceptable trade-off for people. And I think that intellect and competence has helped me overcome a lot of those challenges, which I'm very lucky that that's the case.
I like that you touched on the feedback that for us it's completely like pointless. I was looking at some of the feedback that I got in past years. And I remember specifically this one that said, she always goes 100 miles an hour. She needs to stop to give space for other people. And I was like, how? I don't know how to. Like, this is already me masking, because if you knew what's in my head at every single moment in the day, you will feel like, how is this person alive? So for you to tell me you need to slow down, you clearly don't understand what's going on here.
Yeah, totally.
What advice would you give to leaders, to managers, to de-bias that feedback?
So actually, in this document that I was talking about, we wrote a bunch of stuff about feedback in there. So we said, you need to ask your colleague how they want to prefer to receive feedback. So some people prefer written feedback to in person. So I personally much prefer written feedback, because then I can process it in my own time. I can reread it, so I make sure I understand it. We said that we want people to ask us how direct they should be with us. So as somebody autistic, I actually want great directness, because I don't read between the lines very well. If you say something very softly, I might not understand it. I might not get what you're actually trying to say. But equally, for people with ADHD, they often have RSD, right? And so for somebody with that, they might need you to be very gentle in your feedback. And so, most of the advice we give is like, talk to the person and ask them, what's the mechanism they want to receive you, but how direct do you want to be? We say, like, just like any good feedback, it should focus on the behaviors and assume good intent rather than assuming negative intent. We need to balance or receive balanced feedback. A lot of neurodivergent people get a huge amount of negative feedback about who they are, about how they are, from everybody all the time. And so, it can feel, if you get negative feedback, like being kicked when you're down. And some things that are very easy for neurotypicals are very difficult for neurodivergent folks, and vice versa. Like, it's sometimes very difficult for people to understand that though we can do some of the really complicated things, doing the simple things what seems simple to them isn't simple to us, right? And so just organize your calendar is not helpful. That's not great feedback, right? It's like telling somebody who's dyslexic, just spell better, right? That's not helpful, and it's illegal, actually. It's discriminatory to say that. So helping them figure out systems to be better at those things that seem easy is important. So, buddy up with someone who's great at spelling and have them proofread your work, right? And then that's something that somebody dyslexic might do. Just being aware of this rejection sensitivity is very important, because it's physically painful to receive feedback for some of us. And because we've had such a trend of negative feedback all through our careers and our lives, it can be very difficult. I train a people management course, and one of the things I say there is, like, I have some feedback for you is the second most distressing phrase in the world, the most distressing being your partner saying we need to talk, right? And so just be aware of all of that baggage that there is for people who are neurodivergent around feedback and around improvement. It's not that we don't want to improve, it's just that you're kicking us when we're down, because the whole world has been telling us we're wrong for our entire lives.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that you said, and I'm glad that you're such an important figure in the tech world, and you're shaping future leadership, because this is what we need. We need people to talk more about this. We need people to understand what we actually need, because at the end of the day, we're also the out of the box thinkers, right? We are what brings innovation, and it is required. So thank you. I guess that's what I wanted to say. But to those who are listening, and, to those that have been diagnosed late in life and have struggled most of their life, what piece of advice would you give them?
Try to move on from the anger as fast as you can. Get through the grief stages about the life you could have lived and focus on the life you can live. Like, this is a gift. It's a gift to know yourself this well. It's something that not a lot of other people get, is to understand the inner workings of themselves. They don't need to. They don't have that pressure on them to understand themselves so well. But understanding yourself really, really well can be such a superpower. It can be so helpful, and it can make you much, much, much clearer about your sense of self and who you are and what you believe in and what you will do and what you won't do, and what kind of jobs are going to be rewarding for you and what kind of jobs are going to be just tedious. And so take it as the advantage that it is. I'm not saying don't be angry. I'm just saying don't get stuck in anger. Don't get stuck in grief over the life you could have led, and get focused on the life you can lead.
What helped you moving away from that anger?
I think just I wasn't angry at my parents or at my school or anything like that, because I was just like, I understood that it was masked by my academic performance, right? When I was a kid, people didn't worry about the kids who were doing well at either, if you were doing well at arts, sport, and or academics, then you were fine. And there were kids in this class who weren't doing well at arts, sport, or academics or anything, and they needed more attention. And so I think I just never really had some of the anger that some other people have about it. And so it's an advantage I have, I suppose. But I understand that it's frustrating to find this out late. I understand that it's hard to not have known. But in knowing, you probably understand yourself better than most neurotypicals ever will. So take that advantage and run with it.
Thank you so much, Meri. Like, I really appreciate your time with us, and to all the things that you shared. I'm absolutely sure that whoever listens, like, will get a lot of benefits from listening to your story and your experience.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's really good.
The Spacious Brain podcast will come back soon with a new episode and new stories to share. So stay tuned and follow me now, before you forget.